So today I want to discuss why Hamas would be adverse to the idea of surrender, which is kind of what the ceasefire agreement depends on it to do in a sense. And I'm not just going to refer to, the general aversion that people have to surrendering. I mean, in general, people would prefer to win than they would prefer to surrender. But in the case of Hamas, it doesn't work as I would say normal conventional warfare. So I think we should touch a bit on that. And to even approach this issue, we need to remember one crucial thing about Hamas in Gaza, and that is that Hamas is first and foremost a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Akhwa al-Islamiyya, that came from Egypt. And this really matters a lot in the context of what it sees its mission as being. I guess most of you would already know that the mission of Hamas is, of course, to free holy Palestine, and having that be a step to restoring Islam to its former glory and its deserved glory in their eyes, right? And ending the humiliation, which is the Israeli state. So, why does that matter to us? So, for that, we need to dive a little bit into the Muslim narrative around what it means to surrender in front of an evil force like Israel, right? Israel is conceived as this ultimate evil entity in the eyes of the Islamist world. They're essentially worse than the Nazis. They constantly refer to Israel as the Zion Nazi occupation or stuff like that. That's the play of word that they would have, even though the ones who enjoy reading Hitler books are actually the Islamists in the Arab world, and less so the Israelis, but that's beside the point. So what do you do when you're asked to disarm, as the current ceasefire agreement requires the Hamas factions and the Islamic factions in Gaza to do? What do you do when you are requested to disarm like that? Well, luckily, as Muslims, there is a book that tells us exactly what we do in any situation. And there actually is a reference to what Muslims conceive as exactly this incident in the Quran. We're talking about, if you're curious and looking it up, it's the 4th surah and the 102nd verse. So it's 4 by 102. And this refers to essentially prayer in combat. I'm not a Quran expert by any means, but the relevant part that's often quoted in contexts like these is this one. The disbelievers would wish to see you neglect your weapons and belongings so they could launch a sweeping assault on you, right? So that's the part that's often quoted here. That, well, what do you do when you're asked to disarm? Well, the disbelievers would wish to see you disarm, but that's only so they could launch a sweeping assault on you. And indeed, Allah has prepared a humiliating punishment for the disbelievers, of course. So this verse is often quoted in contexts like these, in which a Islamist organization is forced or requested to disarm, essentially, and they're like, wait, but we already have the word of Allah that tells us, warns us from exactly these cases, right? So here's another interesting thing to add to the narrative. Back during the Yugoslavia wars, there was a particular incident in which the Bosniaks, meaning the Muslim Bosnians, okay, there was, of course, this huge civil war, and they were asked to disarm. Everyone were asked to disarm. And the Muslim telling of this story would be that the Muslims indeed disarmed, and the other factions that were opposing them did not disarm. And thus the Muslims were defenseless. And this culminated in the massacre of this place, which I'm not even going to bother trying to pronounce. Well, you know what? Let's try it for good measure. Is it Srebrenica? Srebrenica, okay? In which many thousands of Muslims were killed or expelled and all that. And that pushes us as Muslims back to the warning from the Quran. We must not give up on our weapons and on our belongings. And this incident is still cited today by Muslim scholars as to why must you not give up on your arms. Now, you could give up on, maybe pretend to give up on your arms, but you must not lower your guard, because the enemy, the disbelievers, are preparing a sweeping assault on you. And this is the religious thought behind, well, refusing to disarm. But in fact, if you really think about it, there are many other ideas. Well, I guess you could call them religious in a sense, but they're not exactly religious. So in the Palestinian national myth, national idea, you might even say, the idea of resistance is extremely important. And the prevailing belief is that Israel is a made-up state that would, given enough time and resistance, kind of just pack up and leave or just collapse. And it's being compared often to the Crusader kingdoms that only lasted for, what was it, like 80 years? Or was it like 110? It wasn't that long, right? It was temporary. And this idea and martyr culture and all that basically fermented the belief throughout the entire Arab world that Israel is temporary, as I've said, and that resistance will eventually free not just the what they refer to as occupied territory of the 67 borders, but the entirety of Palestine, right, which they would also call occupied land. So Israel proper, as people would call it in the West. So the idea of resistance is extremely important. And the mere act of resistance, even if it means annihilation, as we've seen in Gaza, and destruction, the mere act of resistance is worthy and good, even if it's going to head you in a very bad direction. And because the act of resistance is great always, then surrender is, it's hard to lose. Because even if you had to disarm, it's still a victory because you resisted. You've kept that flame alive that the people coming after you will just keep resisting until Allah decides that it's time to free Palestine. You would never admit that you've lost, even if you've surrendered, right? Because it's not a loss for you. It's a victory, even though your city is absolutely devastated and the population is devastated, but you've won, in a sense. So I think that's a curious case. I kind of wanted to highlight that for you guys, and I hope you found it useful. And that's all I have for you for today. So the end. See you around.